Great welcome. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. This is the third event of the spring 2019 semester, the Engineering Leadership Series. Tonight we have a really special guest, Jerry Hunter. Jerry is an alumni from the University of Arizona, got a bachelor's degree in 1988 and a master's in 1990 in systems engineering, which I happen to like that program a lot. He's currently Senior Vice President of Snap, making Snapchat application. He joined Snap in October 2016 as Vice President of Core Engineering and took over his current position in December 2017. Previously, Jerry worked at Amazon for 9 years. He initially served as their Vice President of Corporate Applications and later as Vice President of Infrastructure, where he was responsible for data centers across the globe. Before Amazon, Jerry spent 17 years at Sun Microsystems, rising to Vice President of IT. When he was a grad student, he worked at the NASA Ames Research Center, automating life science experiments for the International Space Station. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you.
Before we get started, just out of curiosity, how many are Snapchat users in the room?
Yeah.
Does that match your data pretty well, Jerry? Sans a new. Yeah, great. So let's start with learning a little about you. Tell us what brought you to the U of A.
Well, I was born and raised in Tucson. Seemed like the natural place to go from a local high school to a local university.
A good university too, right?
Well, I didn't understand why anybody would go anyplace else.
Right. So why systems engineering when you came here?
That's a funny question. There was a kid that there was a career festival, and I couldn't go. And this guy that I trusted, I was like, well, tell me about all the engineering disciplines. And he goes, yeah, systems, that's the hardest one. I was like, why is that? It's like, all those things, those equations that we used, well, those guys figured out, which turned out to be false. But it was the thing that made me come. I was like, oh, I want to do the hardest thing.
Nice. Did you guys know that? I did my degree in system, and I might have chose differently if I knew that. So tell us a little bit about those early years in your career when you were between bachelor's, grad, Ames Research.
Yeah, it was. I loved going to school here. We did a tour earlier, and you saw the lab that I used to sit in as a grad student, and it was fun. It's like I liked the teachers, I liked the professors who were here, I liked the curriculum, and New Tucson's a great place to go to school. I mean, it's a really nice place. I thought I was going to be a professor, and then one of the professors here talked me out of it. And his exact quote was something along the lines of, he's like, you're really good, but I don't think that you're professor material. That's the quote. And I was like, really, why is that? And he's like, well, you're not focused enough on the little things. You like to focus on the bigger things. Now, I actually think that also in hindsight was not true, but it was enough to make me go, yeah, okay, that's a good idea. And about that time, my professor here, Don Schultz, had gotten me an internship at NASA in the Bay Area, working on basically robotic manipulators for the space station. And so my thesis was manipulating objects in zero gravity and basically maintaining stability of the object. So I thought I was going to get a job at NASA. They actually offered me a job. I went out there, and Congress cut their funding, and so jobs went away, and I ended up waiting tables in Palo Alto. And it was just super, super lucky because that was 1990, right before .com. And as .com started picking up, another university, U of A alum from the SIE department called me up and said, hey, there's this company, Sun Microsystems, they're hiring. And they're doing an open house. Why don't you come over and check it out? And so I ended up just going and interviewing. They didn't like me because I wasn't a computer science person. The person that they hired didn't show up for work that day. They called me that day and said, if you can show up today, you're hired. So showed up.
So how'd that work out? So at that point, what did you see, if you thought of where you were the early part of your career, and you looked out 10 years, did you have any sort of goals and aspirations? What did you think you'd be doing?
No, I thought I was going to be an engineer. I loved just doing.
I think you are an engineer.
I know, yeah. It's a different kind of engineer, I'll tell you. No, I thought I was going to be doing robotics, writing code, and I did that for a couple of years, and I really enjoyed it. In fact, it's one of the things that we were doing deterministic simulations, one of the classes, I don't think it was 310 or something, I can't remember the number. And I pulled that material out and did a simulation for this organization I was in, and they made a bunch of decisions on it, and the manager's like, you should be in management. Like, we need people to do this. And I didn't want to do it. I was like, I hate that stuff. It just seems like a terrible idea. But then it turned out there was a super technical company, and it turns out a lot of these technical companies, you have to be technical and do management at the same time, and so you have to keep yourself up to speed on technology. So that turned out to be a good mix.
Yeah.
So I would say I would never have seen myself in management. I thought I was going to be a straight track individual contributor, just work on solving technical problems. But it turned out that organizations are just big systems. And you manage them the same way that you manage any other kind of systems problem. And they operate under the same, shockingly, they operate under a lot of the same principles, and it's just inputs and outputs and manage the system.
Some people involved, little stochasticity here and there.
Yeah, a little.
Yeah. So now tell us about this path to your job as Senior VP at Snap.
17 years at Sun. So I started off doing phone support, which sounds really unsexy. In fact, when I got the job, first of all, because I had that sort of series of events, I was like, I don't know, I'm not sure if I'm hireable. And there was a recession happening at the time, and people just weren't hiring. And so when I got the job as a phone support technician, like pick up the phone when customers call in for support, I'm like, I spent all this time getting a master's degree to be on the phone and say, hi, this is Jerry, how can I help you? And it turned out that the customers that called, about half of them were really clueless. They had no idea what was going on with technology. And mind you, these are Sun workstations, so it's Berkeley BSD Unix, running on some very proprietary hardware. And so a lot of people didn't know what was going on, and so it was like walking through people through basic technology, like, do you have your system turned on? Yes, it's on. It's 100% on. Screen's black, nothing works. I think it's broken. It's like, okay, and then you go through 15 steps of troubleshooting and say, well, I'd like you to look. There's this button in the back, and I want you to take a look at it. Is it up or is it down? They're like, it's down. Okay, that means it's off. Turn it up. And they're like, oh, that fixed it. Thank you. In those days, it was like, that was reasonably common. But then on the other hand, there were people who are like, I'm rebuilding, I've got this hardware that I'm interfacing, I'm rebuilding the firmware on the operating system, I'm using the foundation of your operating system to do it, I don't understand how inodes work. And so I became the inode expert for Berkeley BSD at Sun, because it's like, well, I don't know how it works either, I'm gonna just go read the code. I took C here, but I wasn't a computer scientist, and so I had to teach myself how to read somebody else's code, which was terribly commented, and so basically you're unwinding the logic along the way, and then suddenly you understand how it works, and then everybody comes to you because you're the only person that's read the code. So it's there's weird paths that lead you to things that are different than what you think. That kind of led into, I ended up running part of the operating system at Sun. I ran the middleware stack at Sun, ended up running all of a big chunk of the IT at Sun, different pieces, which was all fun. Sun was a fun company, but Sun, as you know, went up. And then .com, it was the hottest company ever, and then it started to go down, and it never recovered, and it eventually went away. And that was an eye-opener when a company that you love, you realize, like, it can just go away. Mm. And that led me to Amazon. Now, surprisingly, the time I joined Amazon had an up period, and we joined right as it was on, my wife and I, we joined right on a down period. And about 6 months into taking the job, Amazon was cratering.
It wasn't personal, right?
I thought it was. My wife was like, "What did you do to us?" That's a quote. When we moved from Boulder, Colorado to Seattle, miserably rainy, didn't like it, and the stock's going down. It looks like she's like, "Is this another Sun? Is it another failed company?" And like, little did we know, like Amazon's just been on fire ever since. Yeah. Now, the first corporate app stuff was just working on I call it internal IT, but probably the most interesting was we're managing all the systems that developers use to manage their code bases. And that led to running the infrastructure. And infrastructure at Amazon was started off buying Dell boxes, Cisco boxes, renting data center space, buying energy off of whatever grid you happen to be in, to building our own servers, which included building our own memory, building our own CPUs, building our own motherboards, rack and stacking everything ourselves, building our own data centers, building our own networking, all the networking operating system, network control plane, which basically meant managing networking real time. So Amazon was managing networking real time like 10 years ago. And like about the time that the industry started talking about, service design networks, it's like, so we were doing all this huge innovation, but it was big. It was just like a ton of people and super stressful. Like there was an outage we had and data centers fail. Power goes out, all your backup systems, something goes wrong, wasn't designed correctly, somebody made a design flaw. Entire building goes down, all the servers and networking lose power, and everything's out. There was one of those in Sydney, and it ran all of the ATMs for the company. And so the Prime Minister's office was calling us in the middle saying, what's going on and how long until it's fixed? And I'm like, well, I don't run your ATMs, man. It's like, I don't know what's going on. And it turned out it was in the same building that we were in. And so like it's like that kind of stuff, and those were happening a little too often. I was just ready for something different. And a friend of mine worked at Snapchat, actually an ex-employee of mine who had been there from the very beginning, and he said, why don't you come here, because this is really fun. And so that got me to Snap, and Snap is really fun. It's very different. It's very different. It's not the same as keeping emergency rooms up.
Yeah, for us, especially to have you come and talk, it's such a different industry. It's social media. And I'm sure we have lots of graduates out there working in the social media industry, but tell us about what it's like to work in the social media industry, because it's so different than construction and power and things.
Well, one thing I want to clarify, like I think we in Snapchat don't think of Snapchat as a social media platform. Like I see Snapchat is a connection platform. It's where people connect with each other directly. And it's like social media, I think more of like, it's more broadcast. It's more of somebody puts something out there and thousands of people see it, and the chance of coming back and talking to them is limited. Like ours is all about the one-on-one conversation and using pictures to do it. So using pictures and stories, and if you play with the AR, and it's about having fun with each other, but it also conveys emotion in ways that's really hard to do on just conventional text. And like I think that like when I talk to people who use Snapchat and really love it, they talk about the fact that they were taking snaps and sending it back and forth at a party that they were at, or they saw some really cool thing and they wanted to share it with each other. And so like it's different because there's a relationship that people have on Snapchat that I don't think that you have on other platforms. So I'll just start by saying I don't think we're social media.
My questions I should just
dump them all.
Yeah.
But like that said, like, and this is the thing that I think so far almost any problem that's ever been put in front of me is interesting. Even ones that you look at the first time and you go, this is just the most boring thing I've ever seen in my life. It turns out to be just fascinating. And these applications are no different. Like working, when you think about what Snapchat does. So first I have to build an application on a client, and that client is an iPhone or an Android device, so it's the only things it works on right now. Sorry, I keep them. And basically, if you slap together an app and throw it on these platforms, and you got like this tiny little amount of stuff that you're doing, it's pretty straightforward. So most application developers on a phone don't really have to spend a lot of time thinking about, is this architecture sophisticated? Does it manage the resources properly? But like our application uses every single resource on the phone. It uses the camera, it uses the screen, it uses the battery, it uses the memory a lot. Like you're doing those lenses are memory intensive applications. Like some of these things are things that 10 years ago you would have needed a gigantic server, and we're doing it on an iPhone. And so you really have to have sophisticated technology that efficiently utilizes the resources on the app. That's not what we did. This application was built by some college students who had a great idea, and they were all about moving fast. Get features out quickly, understand what it takes to make your customers happy, and it's like, and then it got to a point where it's like, there's a lot of stuff on this app, and it's hammering the resources on the phone. So now that's iPhone, but like how many of you have iPhones? I'm curious. All right, so most people have iPhones, right? So iPhones almost always have the latest, greatest hardware on it. And so if you're writing applications for iPhones, it's pretty easy. Now, how many of you have Android devices? All right, so Android is a different beast. So I have 4 phone types that I have to manage for iOS. I have literally, at one glance, I had 64,000 variations of Android and hundreds of variations that I have to actively code to. And so that just changes the game. So our Android app was terrible. We just were in the process of rewriting it and rolling a new release out now that has a modern architecture that takes advantage or pays attention to resource management. And it's like, so I'm going on and on because obviously this is something that I'm very excited about right now. But it's like, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, it's like, tell me about your thoughts on managing memory on a phone. I'd be like, that sounds kind of boring. And it turns out that these problems are all interesting. So there's managing resources on the phone. Now, equally, like all of this information has to transact somewhere, and they transact in data centers. Mm-hmm. And right now, these data centers, so having built data centers, the first thing that every analyst at Snapchat asks me is like, you guys can build your own data centers? And my answer is not a chance. These cloud providers have changed the industry forever. So by the way, if any of you are ever in a company where somebody tells you build your own data center, I'm just telling you flat out, there's 0 chance you will ever do it as cheap as you're going to get on the cloud, no matter what they charge you. There's 0 chance. Having like dealt with these providers top to bottom, quick. So in 2011, there's this giant flood in Thailand. I don't know how many of you guys remember this, mm-hmm. And that flood wiped out the entire disk industry. The flood literally put 9 feet of water across almost every manufacturer of disks on the planet. 85% of the disks that were created on planet Earth came out of this one valley that was severely flooded. So we're a cloud provider. There's really no chance that we live without adding disks to our capacity. Right. And we're trying to run just in time, which means we have a very limited buffer supply, and that buffer supply gets eaten up very quickly. So I got on a plane and I went and met with these disk providers, Hitachi Disk Systems, Seagate, WD, like there's just, and they were all like, sorry, there's nothing we can do. And on one of them, they showed me these videos of the facility. And the facility, he's like, well, so here's what happened. I'm like, how long is it going to take for you guys to get a line back up and running? And it's like, months. It's like, it can't take months. Like, I think if I had a team of 20 people, I could figure out how to get a line back up in days if you could just find another facility. And I'm like, yeah, well, here's the problem. First, you have to get boats to it, and the streets are full of cars, but you can't see them. They're all underwater, and the boats keep hitting the top of cars, and so we've sunk 2 boats. When we finally got to the facility, and it had a crane, and we made sure that the boat had the capacity for handling the weight of the machines, and we were going to take the machines out one at a time and take them to higher ground. We picked up the first machine, we put it in the boat promptly sunk because we hadn't taken into account the fact that the machine would be full of mud. Mm-hmm. And the mud would sink the boat. And so it just took them forever to get it back up and running. So I showed up at Hitachi Disk Systems, and Hitachi's board of directors was all about cloud, and at the time, they were the only ones leaning in. And they're like, we'll figure out how to cover your disks. How many do you need? And I gave him the number, and he's like, I don't think we produce that many disks. And so he said, if you'll sign up if you'll sign a long-term commitment with us, we can take it to funding to a bank, and the bank will give us money to build a new line, and we'll build the line, but you got to commit to it. So we committed, and that was a long time ago. That commitment's long since run out. But then he said, well, this is how many we'll be able to produce, and I was like, I think I need you to build 2 facilities. So here's the thing. The way we did this is they basically opened their books. I looked at every single place that they had wasted cost as a result of inventory stored someplace, because if you're building disks normally, first you build them, you have to change your lines because you have different disk types. Changing your lines costs money. Going and then storing the disks at the end of the line till you have enough that you can put on a pallet and ship someplace, but usually you got to wait until there's a truck that's full. You have to have orders so that you have it sitting in a storehouse somewhere. All that's waste. I was like, the second it comes off the line, it needs to come to the data center. So all the waste that's in there that you're building into your cost, I want you to take out. Now, that turned into this, I'm not allowed to say what it was, but the cost savings was bigger than anything that you could ever get, no matter how much you negotiated. And so, and that's just one component.
Like a systems engineering problem.
It was such an exciting problem. It was so exciting. And it's the kind of thing that when you first see it, you're like, this sounds kind of boring, but it turns out to be super fun.
So in this arena that's not social media, technology, cloud computing, and things, Do you see any like new, exciting, emerging trends coming that you can share with us?
Yeah. There's like so trends. Here's a couple.
By the way, I reworded the question quite a bit. So
The thing is there's a couple of things. I'm just thinking about what I want to say because it's like there's some trends that are just super like micro trends that you can do, and it like here's one trend. Like I have a son and daughter, 21, 23, and what I tell them regularly, and all their friends is like learn how to code. Because that's a trend that's coming.
What was that? Could you say that again?
Yeah, learn how to code. Learn how to code. Learn how to code in C. Learn how to code in Python. Make sure you know R. If you can do SQL, like those are all things that I think like every single job is going to need to do. And I'll give you my daughter did an internship at Amazon in HR, so it's an HR internship, and her job was to sit and do these focus groups, and she was a communications major, and her mentor came to her and said, hey, I need you to go build a couple SQL queries, and I need you to pull a bunch of data and blah, blah, blah. And she came back and said, I don't even know what SQL is. And so we sat down and went through SQL. But like, I was like, wow, it's really surprising to me that they're asking HR interns to do SQL queries.
Got to get the data.
Well, that's it. It's like,
Right.
everything's about data. Right. And so I think learning how to code is probably the micro trend that no matter what you're planning on doing, like that doesn't mean become a computer scientist. In fact, I think it's the opposite. Be whatever you're going to be, but learn how to code because everything's going to have data. And whatever you're doing, you're going to do better if you're the person that everybody comes to extract, analyze, and do decision making with the data. Like that is far and away the most valuable resource in both Amazon and in Snap. From a more, like that's my micro, like macro, I think AR is early days, like early days. I think all the applications that are out there on AR right now are largely toys. Like AR, if you've played with Snapchat and you have the filters and it does the face lens technology, like some of the most sophisticated technologists that I've worked with in my career work in that group. They are really good. It is hardcore technical stuff. And they're using it right now for things that are fun. But like one of those guys recently went off and is now running the self-driving cars part of Uber. And he kind of gave me a tour and showed me the stuff that they're doing. And it's like like AR and the way that AR gets managed. And then the other piece is ML. It's like ML is still early days, and it's ML sounds so. Like people like to use ML like it's the words ML, machine learning. It's this big, wild, crazy thing. It turns out it's not wild and crazy at all. It's really simple. It's just a couple of sophisticated systems that are mashed together, and you kind of got to understand all those systems. And once you do, it turns out to be super simple. Now, it turns out not everybody learns all those systems. They don't know how to mash them together, and as a result, it seems like magic. It ain't magic. It's just math. It's computers. It's data extraction, and it's. Those positions, ML and AR, I think, are some of the most interesting spaces to go into in the future. Like I tell my son right now, I finally convinced. He kind of convinced himself, but he's doing like a data science, computer science, data science degree, and he's just starting to do ML. And it's like, and his comment to me is like, "This stuff's a lot easier than I thought it was going to be." And it's like, I think that people like to use the word ML because it's kind of like Wizard of Oz, right?
Right.
It sounds really magical, and it turns out, no, it's just the same stuff that I learned in this program. We just have bigger computers.
Yep. And more data.
And way more data.
Right. So one of the things in the leadership series that we like to talk about is in our industry and engineering in general, diversity and women in the industry. And do you see some trends? I mean, talk about that.
Well, there's definitely, there are more women getting hired today than there were before. It's still not enough. I actually think opportunities for women are better than they've been, it's sort of a line that gets better over time. All the tech firms in the Bay Area, all the tech firms in Seattle, all the tech firms that I know of are focused on making workplaces inclusive. And There's just tons of programs that are out there. So I mean, for me, it's like I feel like it's getting better. I don't feel like it's where it needs to be by a long way, though. Our workforce should mirror match our customers, because the customers, like when your workforce matches your customers, you make better decisions about what features need to be in the app that satisfy the customer base. And so that's kind of we're focused on.
So you see that trend growing.
I think it's
see
getting,
that trend growing.
It's
Yeah,
still,
so-
yes, it's growing. It's not where it should be.
Yeah. So let's talk about Snap as a company and working there. How many different groups and things work at Snap? If you can tell us that.
Well, yeah, there's, I mean, it's traditional companies, sales, finance, HR. Like Snap
Traditional
has,
company created by
sorry.
a 22 year-old at a
Yeah, yeah.
university.
Yeah,
Okay,
our CEO is a pretty amazing person. I mean, he came up with the idea for the company, and he tells me stories about walking on, there's this mall in Santa Monica called Promenade. I don't know if you guys, anybody here's from Santa Monica, and he tells a story about having, he and his co-founder Bobby had these little flyers for Snapchat, and they were walking around and said, "Want an app that has disappearing pictures? No. Want an app that has disappearing pictures? No." He's like, nobody ever took a single one of his flyers, and so it was really disheartening.
Yeah.
And it just took it was one of those things where you just keep going at it and going at it, and when it took off, it took off.
When you joined the company, did you predict how fast it would grow? Did you realize that when you?
It was already growing really fast by the time that I joined. I think that we went through a slow period last year that I think was like what Evan and I both believe was largely driven by the fact that our Android application was so bad. And just the Android application, so here's how you think about it. 50% of iOS users use the latest iPhone. Like 5% of Android users use the latest, highest-end devices, which means 95% of those people are using phones that have lower resources and lower capacity. And our app wasn't working on those. It worked on the high-end ones, but it didn't work on the low-end ones. And so, by rewriting the app, we're already starting to see. Well, I'm not allowed to say. I'm very
It looks
happy.
good, huh?
I'm very happy with how
Yeah.
things are going.
Yeah, great. Let's see, it's not a social media network, so I'm going to skip that question. So at Snap, you have these engineering teams, and when you, let's see, after the story you told me earlier today, I'll be careful how I ask the question, but when you're looking to hire people, what sort of characteristics are you looking for in people?
So it's really interesting. I look for people who are technically fearless. And so that's kind of connected to what we talked about before. There's no such thing as a technical problem that I can't do. Like, it sounds arrogant, and maybe even sounds like hubris, but like people who have that and aren't afraid to just dig in and figure out, like, I need to understand what it takes to make a problem go. I think that's important. See a problem, solve a problem. Take ownership of things. It's like, I was telling Larry, I saw a woman in old engineering. I was walking down the stairs. She was walking up the stairs, a student, and she had a horribly disgusted look on her face. And she looked down, and there was a dead cockroach on the stairs. And she reached down, and she picked it up, and she took it over to the trash. And I was like, if I wasn't late for something, I was like, I want to ask her what her name is and when she's graduating, because that's the kind of person that sees a problem, solves a problem. And I think it's important because companies are full of problems. And when you have people who are like, that's not my problem, like companies languish and they don't get stuff done. And so the thing is, it can be exhausting to be a person like that because there's always problems and you're always having to prioritize. And I mean, it's way better to have a long list of problems that you've prioritized and then you're knocking out the super impactful, important stuff for your company or whatever it is you're doing, than to check the box on the stuff that you were told to do and then sit back and wait for the next thing to land in your lap. And so like that, engage, bias for action, take ownership of issues. Those are the things I think that, like, it's,
Yeah,
you see a
great.
person like that, and those people tend to do really well. By the way, I never finished answering your question about the engineering team. There's one thing about Snap that's different than most Silicon Valley companies, and I actually think it's important. We have a big engineering team, and then Evan runs a team that he calls designers. And the designers are super focused on the look and feel and the way the app acts. And understanding how people interact with it. Do they like it? Do they not like it? In the traditional Silicon Valley company, what you'd do is you'd cut the engineers loose. They would run a bunch of A/B tests. So you've got your existing application. You make a slight change. You let that out to some sample of users. You look at the key metrics, and you see whether or not the key metrics are positive or negative. And whatever one wins is the one you choose. So if the change wins, you put that in place. If the change loses, you leave the old one in place, and you keep trying. So engineers do that. The problem is it leads you to local optima. And you get stuck there. And depending on what the objective function is, make money, it could lead you to local optima, which is bad for everybody. And we think that by having these designers in place, designers are always looking out for the best interest of the customer, and they'll go back to, it's a frustration point. It creates tension in the organization because the engineers will say, we think you should do feature X because feature X clearly is a winner. And the designers can take like a moral high ground at times and go like, I just don't think that's right. I think that we're going in the wrong direction. That's not what our customers want to see. A great example is, like, you guys know what clickbait is. Clickbait was like starting to pop up on Snapchat, and there was some engineers that like, this is great. Look at our engagement. It's taking off. And the designers and a couple others like, this is terrible, because it's a burn your kindling kind of situation where like you get a little bit of benefit, and eventually people are like, wait a second, I'm being tricked. And eventually we walk away from clickbait. And so having this tension in the organization makes us make better decisions.
Yeah, sort of design thinking and a whole group
Yeah.
focused on ideation. Yeah, that sounds great. So an engineer that's now in management, but it sounds like you're a great leader. So let's explore a little bit of, well, you must be. You've risen to quite a level and run quite a few people. But what do you do to promote teamwork and gain your team's respect?
So I think, I have to give you a little bit of a story, which can be annoying. Sorry, I tell a lot of stories,
We
but
like your stories.
when I worked at Sun, people worked in silos, and it was very me-driven. I'm going to go and do something great. And then I went to Amazon, and Amazon was not me-driven. In fact, me-driven people didn't do well at all. And it was really about, like, what are we doing for the customer? Doesn't matter whether the technology is the most exciting, sexy thing ever. Are you doing the right thing for the customer? And creating that mission focus about focusing on a customer sort of bled into a bunch of other things, which I think are important to answer that question. One is, you should have open conversations about all decisions that you're making. You should be transparent about the information necessary to make a decision, whether that's technical or policy or whatever kind of decision you're making. Bring the people who are capable of contributing to the decision into a room, assign a person or two to write down all of the information, ask all the relevant questions that you think are necessary for this, whether they're hard questions, poke people in the eye questions, these people are way off base questions, it doesn't matter. People should be allowed to state their opinion in a non-confrontational, non-like attack way. Attack the problem and make sure that we have the best information that's available and argue about it. So like fostering an environment where people can say what they think. So first of all, it turns out like when you're in a culture where people feel like they can't say what they think, like you feel bad. You're like, I think they're making the wrong choice, but I'm afraid to tell them that's the wrong choice. And so creating an environment where people feel comfortable saying, no, that's the wrong choice. Here's why. And it's like people may decide that what you're saying is not right, because we'll have smart people in a room, and at the end of it, you might walk out of that room going, I still think you're wrong, but you had your say, and other smart people in the room were there, and over time you grow to trust that those people are also good and smart, and then you trust that in general you're making better decisions than you were making alone. And I think that the longer you operate in that sort of framework, so that means you have to trust each other, that means you can't be backstabbing each other, no politics. Politics has to be stopped instantly. People need to be able to say their piece. You need to be transparent in the way that you're thinking about your decisions. And then when you make the decision, and this is probably the most important thing, nobody's allowed to come back later and see, I told you were wrong. Right? It's like,
We need that rule.
When you make the decision, you get on board with that decision. Everybody gets on board. And when you get on board with that decision, you're like, I may not agree with it, but I'm 100% into that decision. And by doing that, people feel like, okay, my voice is heard. Now, if it turns out this decision is wrong, one thing you can be rest assured, that decision is going to get unwound. And we're going to try the other thing. And when that happens, all the people who are not on your side, they're going to be 100% on it. And when people understand that that's how it works, magic happens. That's how Amazon works. It's one of the reasons why I think Amazon does such an unbelievable job at delivering. That's what we're building in Snapchat.
Cool. How do you assess risk in your work and your own life? Risk.
Like what kind of risk? Like drive to work car accident risk?
No, the automated vehicles will take care of that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, right.
Machine learning.
I don't know. It's like, I don't think there's, maybe the way to answer this is like there's a, I used to hear a lot of things about work-life balance.
That's the next question. But
Yeah,
keep
okay.
going.
All right. So
You're doing
work-life
fine.
balance is like, there's no work life. Like I had a coach once and I was really stressed out because I had little kids. They were like 4 and 5 and I felt like I wasn't, like I was going to work and I'd be there at a certain time and I'd leave at a certain time and I'd be home at a certain time and it's like sometimes I would miss a baseball game and my wife would be mad, my kids would be upset, and sometimes I'd miss something at work at night and it's like my boss would be upset. And it's like my coach said to me, it's like there's no such thing as work life. Your work and your life are all one. And your goal is to prioritize the things that are important, whatever those are. But the work thing will consume you. So make sure you've spent the time to understand all the things that are not work. Health, working out, time with your friends, time with your family. Build those things into your life. Make sure that they're a priority. And then let work fill in all the way around it. And
Circle of balance.
And it just works.
Yeah. That's great. So tell us about 3 to 5 leadership principles you've discovered and executed that have contributed to your success.
See a problem, solve a problem. Just do it. Prioritize. Like make sure you're prioritizing. Don't let yourself be randomized. I actually think of all the things, prioritization, it's easy to say, and every person in the room will be like, yeah, okay, prioritize. It's like, how do you prioritize? You have this mountain of stuff that's coming out you. How do you actually prioritize? And so I think that that's an important skill to learn. There's another question coming later, I think, that will answer that question, how you do it. I think the other one is just like being empathetic to people around you, like actually listening. One thing that a lot of people will talk with the next thing they want to say, and then when somebody else is talking, they're already thinking about what they want to say and not actually listening. And it's like, just break the cycle, take a step back and actually listen to people and kind of hear what they have to say and decide if it's important or not. And it's like, that means slowing down your own, not just slowing down what you're saying, but slowing down what you're thinking. It's easy to slow down what you're saying and look like you're listening. It's hard to slow what you're thinking and actually be listening. Right. And I think that's an important skill.
Yeah. That sounds important. And I'll divert a little bit, but you told me earlier that you now manage time with 15 and 20 or 25-minute meetings.
Yeah.
So you want us to slow down, think, let everybody talk, and you have these short meetings.
It's true. It's like we were mentioning, like when I went to Snapchat, like every company I've ever been at does like 1-hour meetings. And so you get like 9 meetings a day, 8 meetings a day plus lunch, and for me, 9 meetings a day with lunch in one of the meetings. And I went to Snapchat and everybody was doing these 30-minute meetings. I'm like, this is crazy. You can't get anything done in half an hour. Oh, I'll give it a try. And then I realized, actually, you can get a lot done in 15 minutes. And so I started scheduling myself in 15 and 30-minute chunks. And I just tell people, like, depending on what it is, it's a topical sort of thing. Come in with one sheet of paper. Don't talk to me about what the issue is. Write down what you're thinking. Write down, like, this, expose your thought process. I'll read it, and then we'll talk about what decision you need me to make. And normally, we can make a decision in the meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So in terms of leadership, one of the favorite questions we have in the series is leadership books. Do you read leadership books?
I do. I used to read a lot more. Like I went through a phase where every book I read seemed like it was a repeat of somebody else's book. And now there's a bunch of stuff that seems new again, so it's kind of interesting. But every person who starts in my organization gets these 2 books. And they're old, but they're really good. It's 7 Habits of Effective People and Get Things Done. And I actually think that those we talked a minute or earlier about prioritization. It's like 7 Habits really walks you through this notion of like what is important in your life, like what's really important, and are you treating it with the respect that it deserves? And that includes things like with my wife, spending time with my wife, spending time with my kids, my mom, my brothers, my dad, and it's like making sure that that time's actually being taken care of, and it's not being just consumed with all this other sort of trivial, I'll just say trivial stuff, because there's a lot of trivial stuff that will burn your life up if you let it. And so that process kind of teaches you and walks you through how to think about prioritization, how to actually prioritize those things that are important, and then let anything that's not important happen if it happens. And if it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. If the most important things are getting done, you are personally satisfied. Now the thing is about halfway through my career at Sun, I realized I felt overwhelmed all the time. Like just 12-hour days, I couldn't get enough done. And I started talking to people, and other people talked about the same thing. They felt overwhelmed. And so that was about the time that email became the prime method of communication. And it's like it went from the way that you'd get interactions with people is you'd talk to them. You'd be like, I have to call them. They have to be there, right? So I called. No, they're not here. Okay, I guess I'll call back later. It went from that to, oh, I don't need to do that. I'm just going to send you an email. And so that email volume just started to take off. That was about SMS started to take off at the time. And so suddenly you're inundated with all this information. Wikis are popping up. Blogs are popping up. The amount of information that's coming at you is gargantuan. Yeah. And it's like, and that was just the part where it's really stressing me out because I was just unable to get to everything. And so getting things done, somebody said, you should just read Getting Things Done. In fact, I was about to quit a job that was just overwhelming me. And I told my wife, I was like, I'm taking 3 days. I told my boss, I'm taking 3 days. I'm figuring out how to manage this job because I'm not keeping up. So I took like a Thursday, Friday, and a Saturday, and I just hunted through all this material that people had given me. And the one that I found was Getting Things Done. Getting Things Done is really simple. It's very straightforward. It's a simple workflow. And it's like, since I started doing that, later I told somebody here recently, I had one of my managers say, I like coming to you and giving you stuff because no matter what I give you, how large or small, every single thing, without question, always gets done. And I realized it's like, I didn't used to be like that. Stuff used to fall between the cracks and you'd feel stressed about it and you'd wake up in the middle of the night frustrated because you're like, oh, I forgot to do such and such, and then you can't get back to sleep. And then I started doing this getting things done sort of process, and that just stopped. I mean, it just stopped. And it actually, the title of it's Getting Things Done. I sound like a salesperson for this book. I mean, it's a good book.
You're doing great.
It's Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. And
That's a very important part of the title.
It is a super important part. This stress, and it's not like it doesn't take all your stress away, but what it does is it takes away your brain has a way of telling you need to get stuff done at the most inopportune times. When you're driving, you're like, ugh, I need to stop and write something down, or like you're in a movie or you're in the middle of a conversation with somebody, you're like, oh yeah, I've got to go get this thing done. And it's like when you write everything down every single time, and it's in this place that's trusted and safe, that stops happening. Mm-hmm. And it's like the only time it happens to me now is when I'm like, oh, I don't need to write that one down, it's so small. And I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm like, just write it down. Mm-hmm.
As you get older, Jerry, we call that long-term memory. It's writing it down. If you want to remember it, write it down.
Well, see, now here's my wife and I have this regular debate because my wife had a photographic memory. So anything she saw, she remembered. And so she'd take a list, she'd look at it, and she could read it off to you. And it was super annoying because whenever we get in an argument, she was always right. So as we've gotten older, though, because she learned she never had to write anything down. I learned early I have to write everything down. So now I've got everything written down, and I'm like, look, here's the list. And she's like, oh, all right. So it's this.
But then she remembers it.
Now she does.
Yeah. I like to write them down, make a list on a piece of paper, and then when I'm done, I can cross everything off. I look at the list, I throw it in the garbage because I'm like, that was good. It feels good to throw one out.
Totally.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? So if you went back and you were one of these many students, and we're so grateful that you're all here tonight, think about something that you wish you had learned in school. And we got the coding thing, but think about something else.
SQL.
SQL's coding, I hate to tell you.
Something else that I learned that was, I think, it took, don't know if I want to say this out loud, but I was a pretty judgmental person when I was younger. And I just realized that almost every person can bring enormous value to your organization if you can find the right thing. And it took me a while to figure, the listening piece was the big one for that. I didn't listen to people when I was younger. I was doing the people would talk and I would wait until they stopped talking so I could say my thing. And you could hear them, but you weren't listening. Like I knew what they said, but I wasn't listening. And it's like, you can really learn a lot. You can really learn a lot about the good, like the way to make things right if you're just listening.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for how to stay motivated to be a continuous learner throughout your career?
You know, I think that there's a good friend of mine who also went to school here, who also works at Snapchat now. And he worked with me at Amazon. We've worked at several jobs together. It's kind of fun. And his comment, I asked him to do this job at Snapchat that was grungy, hard work. And I was like, yeah, sorry. And he's like, are you kidding? I fall in love with every job I get. That's why I do these jobs. And I was like, what a great quote. Like, I fall in love with every job I do. And it's find the things in whatever, I think that the real trick is find the thing about whatever you're doing that is interesting and different and unusual and mostly hard. Because I think hard stuff's always interesting. Easy stuff is satisfying for a little while and then stops being satisfying.
Right.
Stuff that's satisfying, the stuff that really deeply satisfies you in the long term is doing stuff that's hard and accomplishing. And so I think don't shy away from hard stuff. I think that's if you're not shying away from hard stuff and digging in, I think you're going to find that one, you're going to love it. And even in the cases where you don't totally love it, you're going to feel great about what you did.
Yeah,
I'm just going to give an example. Anybody know what a FERC license is? Okay, so neither did I. I didn't know what it is all. But it turns out that if you're going to build a wind farm, you need a FERC license. And a FERC license is the license that you use that enables you to take power that you're generating off of wind turbines and put it on the grid. And it turns out that there's all these weird rules around renewable energy.
Yeah.
And the first time I saw a FERC license and all these weird rules, I'm like, oh, this is just all legalese mumbo jumbo. And it really is. It's all legal. It's all very legal. That turns out that there's some very smart capacity manager somewhere whose words gets translated into this legalese, and you have to spend time understanding how it works. But when you do, you're like, oh, the light bulb goes off, and suddenly it's like, wow, this is really fun. It's really interesting. And nobody gets it until you spend the time absorbing all those details and understanding that really smart people spent time figuring out how to make this thing work the way that it works. And it's not perfect, and there's all sorts of opportunity for you in that space, but it's only there if you understand it well enough to see the problem. Mm-hmm. And it is in that process that you can really fall in love with the problem.
Yeah. Cool. Let's open it up to the audience for some questions. I think we have a couple of mics. We have one mic here. Is there another? Anybody got a question for Jerry?
Yeah.
Would you mind to the mic so we can have it? Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
So if you could have a billboard, hypothetically putting it anywhere to get a message out to millions or possibly billions of people, what would you put on it and what would it say?
Well, see now, I'll ask a follow-up. So, work-related? Okay. I think I would do a work-related one because I'm pretty excited about Snapchat. And then my billboard would be a big yellow billboard. And it'd just be yellow. And it would have these few black words in the middle of it. Why copy when you can create? I'll let you think about that one.
Anybody else?
It's probably very unsatisfying to you, but if you think about it.
No? No more questions? Yeah, please.
You talked about machine learning a little bit, but I'm curious to hear what your stance is on the greater AI drama that's going on. There's sort of two schools of thought, that this is just one of many hype phases, and then the other school is that this is the big one. Like it's all really happening now. where do you fall on that
You know,
spectrum?
it's funny because I think it's both, and that sounds like a cop out, but I'll tell you why it's not. Because like the both part is like so I didn't know anything about ML 6 years ago, and I started like digging in, getting some of the people who are really good at it saying, give me material. Most of the material's really raw. It's like there's no ML wiki out there that's really helpful. And so what it really took was having people sit down who are good at it, who are actually creating real value using ML, saying, okay, this is what I'm doing. And as I started digging in, what I realized is it's like, it's all the algorithms that they're using are stuff that I learned in the systems program, like literally. There's not a single one of them out there that was something that I didn't learn here. The difference is the compute and the data the compute power was I remember showing Larry showed me his new 286. And he was very excited about it because he's like, watch how fast the boot prompts scroll off the screen. By the way, you could still read them. Like it was going slow enough that you're like, oh, okay, initializing.
And it was really fast.
And that was really fast, right? And so like the compute was really slow and there was no data, nobody had data. So now you're in this world where like you can build a supercomputer in AWS linking together like the biggest supercomputer every year gets beat because some research institution pulls all of their compute power together like in the middle of the night when nobody's using it and create this gigantic compute machine and go after some big problem. So that sort of capability exists and is only getting bigger. And the volume of data that's out there. So now what's happening is you're taking these algorithms, which usually had a very small amount of data and were almost hand-turned, to something that is that iterates so quickly that a lot of times people don't even understand how the result got achieved. And that's where it's the potential for the big one comes from, because I think that as the data continues to grow and the number of use cases for the data grows, and this is like I think one of the most valuable things that people can do right now is understand where data is, how it's there, how you can pull it together, how you can correlate it, and how you can use systems answer questions and answer really complicated questions. And I think that is just going to lead to just a revolution of change in things that have otherwise thought to be solved. I think medicine's a big one. Like I think there's going to be a lot of things that happen in medicine as a result of this. I think there's really if you've listened to there's this futurist that talks about self-driving cars and the 5 phases of self-driving cars, and it's like that last phase sounds like Star Trek. I think it's less than 2 decades away, and it's driven off of ML and data, like having a car be able to drive through a neighborhood perfectly. Not like I can't say much about it, but the Uber guy showed me the self-driving, like this is the guy that's in charge of all the self-driving stuff, and he showed me some of the stuff that they were working on, and it was 10 years ahead of what I thought was out there. It was shocking how advanced it was, and I think it's going to happen really fast. So, I think the answer is it is just a hyped up version. You don't need to be a rocket scientist. There's no Wizard of Oz magic here. It's just the same stuff that we've been teaching and learning for a long time. It's just applied differently.
Any other questions? There we go. Come on down.
I had a question on responsible tech design. So people check their phones once every 12 minutes, and companies have designed apps with that kind of being the intention. And examples include like red notifications and just like catchy chimes and like screen layout that's designed to kind of like track or like make you look at certain things. And I've noticed, like talking about trends, a lot of my friends and peers are kind of turning on grayscale and keeping their phones on do not disturb and just kind of like mass deleting social media apps because they feel like it's better for just like day-to-day function. So I was wondering if the responsibility falls with the user, if the responsibility should fall with the company in terms of keeping those kind of habits in check.
So I won't speak for the social media apps. Because I think that's a different problem. I think that's a really hard and important problem. And I have opinions on it, but like, I want to put that aside for a second. I'll also say, like, in the world that I'm creating, it's like conversations with each other, right? And it's like the conversations that I want you to have with your friends and family is the same conversation you'd have if you were sitting in a room. And so let me like just give you a sense of this, and this will I'll connect the dots in a second here. It may sound like it's not connecting. So you and I are sitting in a room, and I tell you that microphone is on, and I'm recording everything we're saying. And as soon as this conversation is over, I'm posting it on the internet for anybody to listen to. Like the conversation you and I have is going to be different than if we're sitting across the table out in the courtyard, nobody's listening, and it's just us. And it's like, that doesn't mean that you're going to go crazy, but you're just going to have a different conversation, a conversation that I think is more meaningful. So what I'm trying to create with Snapchat is a way for you to have that conversation. It's why snaps disappear. It's why chats disappear. Like, it is literally to have what Evan will call an authentic conversation with people that you're close to. I think it's to have have a real conversation with people that you're close to. And I think that social media has kind of ruined that at some level, because when you're social media is really focused, because you know everybody's going to see it, including people you don't know them, like friends of friends of friends can see this. Like, you're very cautious about what you actually put out there. I still think that it serves a useful purpose. It's just different. And so when I put those two things together on the have an authentic conversation, I want you to have as many authentic conversations as you think is important for you to have with the people you care about. And so I don't think there's a limit time based on that. Now, I tell my son, there's a time and a place to have a good conversation. Like, when you're in class, don't be snapping me, which he's done. It's like, are you in class? Yes, I am. Stop snapping me. So I think that there are limitations that people need to put on themselves, like in those contexts. I do think that people, on the other side, I'll just give you a very high-level opinion, because it's not fair for me to pontificate on other companies' things that they have to work on. But I do think that is a combination of both the customer and the company. I think that everybody has a role in this. There's a real responsibility. You go ahead.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, you could see you want to say something.
Well, there's a couple things I wanted to touch on. I feel like I kind of adopted smartphones and stuff pretty late. I had a Razr cell phone until I was like 22. But I feel like I got a phone right around the same time that Snapchat was becoming popular. And so what you're saying about it being like a means of connecting to people, and like similar to texting, it's just kind of like point A and point B. Like, it's a way to engage and have a conversation, as opposed to like other forms of social media, which is a lot of browsing and just kind of like creeping on other people. I feel like Snapchat, just because I feel like I've kind of witnessed its progression, has kind of started leaning in a different direction. Like, there's like this new feature that I was kind of caught off guard by, that was like, you could see random people's stories, you could like subscribe to like Vice and all these other things that kind of like detracted from what you're kind of claiming Snapchat's original intention was. And so I was just kind of wondering if that was like something that your company was like aware of, or kind of like, was that intentional, or did you feel like that was something that you guys needed to engage in order to stay relevant, or like maintain high user engagement, or to just have people using it?
Yeah, no, you're talking about the Discover feed, the Discover side of the, and so we went through this period where we're like, well, do we want to like have, a bunch of user-generated content, and it can turn into a very clickbaity thing. Yeah. And I think that what we've sort of concluded, and this could change. So I don't like, one of the things I've noticed about Snapchat is like, we're doing this a lot, and so what I say now could be different later. But I think one is now you'll see that we have user stories back on the right-hand side. Remember, there was a period where user stories got put over on the left, and they were mixed in with the feed, and that was an intent. The intent there was to try and say, hey, look, we want to create a place where you can just communicate with your friends, and that other side you can use or not use. But what we found is that it confused people because of the way that stories were being presented, because it was being connected to the way that you were communicating, as opposed to when the way that people were actually posting stories. So we put that back over into a place where it's more story-oriented. And I can't say numbers, but largely the Discover feed is used to look at stories. Now, the other content that's in there that I think is most interesting and largely relevant happens to be what I'll call like professionally curated, like I'll give you an example. One of my favorite shows and one of the most popular shows is Stay Tuned. Have you ever paid attention to CBS Stay Tuned? It's like a short news show. And so what CBS came and basically said, we want to understand, like, we have news and it's relevant. And we want to get it to this audience that doesn't watch the news, because we pretty much do the news on TV, and this group of people don't use TV. And so so basically they came up with this Stay Tuned, and I think Stay Tuned has more viewers on Snapchat than it does on TV, than CBS News has on TV. It's short, it's news, it's factual, and it's designed to be like a content rich. And so I think there's a difference between sort of this like creeping on other people and having information that's really useful. Yeah. Now, I think that that's going to be something that we continue to do, is provide those sort of almost like mini news channel or mini content. There's shows that we have that are original shows, like Game of Thrones is an original show on HBO. Most people don't think of it, but Game of Thrones set off an entire industry of content, which is just storytelling. It shows. And so a lot of this is storytelling content. So will there be other things in there? Yeah, we're experimenting with a lot of stuff, but like the thing that makes people use Snapchat is communication. Like that side of the feed side, the content side is not what people come to Snapchat to do.
And then, do you mind if I ask another question? Or?
You just wrap it up really quick.
Okay. What was the motivation behind Cash App?
Between which?
It was like, or Snap Cash, I think it's called.
Oh, Snap Cash, yeah.
Who thought of that, and what was the intention behind
Yeah,
that?
yeah, that was, we got rid of that recently.
Yeah.
And it's because nobody used it. And the reason nobody used it, so there's a company, or there's an app in China called WeChat. And WeChat is the most popular app in China. And it turned out that WeChat, one of the things that WeChat did that was unbelievably successful was offering cash on your phone, a lot like Apple Pay is today. And what we found was that what WeChat was doing is you'd have two people, it was almost an eBay-like or PayPal-like transition. Like you'd walk into a store, you'd say, I'm going to pay you with WeChat. The cash would get put into an escrow. The merchant would give you the goods, and you'd say they gave me the goods. The merchant would say I gave them the goods, and the cash would be released from escrow, and the merchant would get the goods. And it turned out that there was a lot of transactions in China where people were feeling cheated one way or the other. And so it served a really narrow purpose that made it very, very popular. And it was just one of many things that WeChat did. And so there's a lot of folks in my group that are from Beijing, and they're like, we should do this. It's so good on WeChat. We love it. We should go and try this. And so we tried it. And there's a few people that liked it, but largely people just were like, we don't have that same problem here. I'm not worried about being cheated. I can pull out my credit card, it works just fine, and Apple Pay works just fine. And so it ended up just not being as useful for us as we thought it would be.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions. So Jerry, I have several thoughts, but one of the thoughts I have is that you've been very good over the years to come back and share with us. And so we want to thank you very much for that. And I really want to know what's the draw? I mean, it's home, right? Tucson's home. But what's the other draw for the university? What have we been able to engage you with this, lifelong process?
And well, I really enjoyed it here. I learned a lot. I feel like there's a lot of the success that came out of my life came from what I learned here. I also feel like being local. My parents, nobody in my family had ever gone to college. And at the time, the university was pretty inexpensive. I was able to pay for it myself with tip money from waiting tables. And I think it was important for universities to have strong local presence that local families and kids can be involved in and have an opportunity for, like I did. My entire family were mechanics and postmen, and I just was very, very fortunate. And so my goal is to pay it forward.
Yeah, great. Well, we really appreciate it. It's great to have you as an alumni, and we're very proud of the success you've had. And so let's thank Jerry for being here tonight.